Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintos, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to be successful. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm for the game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. We provide a white glove experience that ensures a win-win outcome. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big thank you for GamesBeat and Jenny Shu for introducing us. I looked back and figured it out. Today we have David Kaye on the show. David started building games in high school when he co-founded Iron Realms Entertainment, one of the world's first free-to-play game publishers. He has spent the past 2 decades building game companies, most recently as the co-founder of Snapshot Games, which grew to 80 people, millions in revenue, and an acquisition by Embracer Group. Today, he is co-founder and managing partner at F4 Fund, a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital fund that invests in magical products. Let's get started. Thanks for being here, David.
Hey, Lizzie, thanks for having me.
Yeah. For anyone that does not avidly read your Substack, can you share a bit of background on your fund?
Yes. So as you just said, we are a seed and pre-seed stage fund. So what that means in practice is we invest either with the first money in, or perhaps there's been a small round before us. And we invest, both my partner and I have been entrepreneurs in the games industry for a long time, but the fund isn't really a gaming fund per se. Our sort of perspective is that making games teaches you how to create magical products. And I can bore you later about about the definition of a magical product. But we think that particularly making games gives you a real advantage in terms of understanding how to create things that are really, really compelling. And those skills are just as valuable outside of games as they are inside of games. And we also believe that as people who've spent a long time making games, we are well placed to recognize, to spot magical products early and invest in them.
And how did you connect with your partner, Joachim?
So I actually first met Joachim about 13 years ago. And at the time I met him, I was in Helsinki. I flew to Helsinki for a job interview. And that came about, I was sort of contacted out of the blue by this Finnish guy. His name was Ilkka. And he was telling me about his company that was called Supercell. I knew nothing about them. This is before they released the mobile game, actually. And I thought, all right, fine, I'll have lunch with this guy. And then at the end of this lunch, I thought, wow, if they want to interview me, I'm definitely going to go on this interview. And so a little bit later, they got in touch and they flew me over to Helsinki. I spent 3 days in Helsinki. It was around this time of year, so it's the depths of winter. And I was interviewed by more or less the whole company. It was probably 25, 30 people that I met with. And this was actually for interviewing for a job that I did not get, which I was to be their first US employee. One of the people who interviewed me was Joachim, and so we didn't really keep in close contact for most of the intervening years, but we sort of were aware of each other because it's kind of a small industry when it comes down to it, and we both became aware at the start of this year that we were both raising funds, and after having a conversation, we decided we would be better off joining forces, and so that's it. That's how it came together.
The rest is history. That's a great story. And it's so important to be on good terms with everyone you interview with, because you might start a fund with them 13 years later.
That was a very memorable. That was a very. That was the most. I haven't done that many job interviews in my time. I've been an entrepreneur most of my career, but I sort of, even though at the time they had, they had a bunch of prototypes basically, and I at the end of the process, there was no doubt in my mind. I said, if this is an incredibly special team, easy to say that in hindsight, but I know that that's how I felt at the time, and I would have dropped everything to work for them. But there you go, different path.
Yeah, it all worked out in the end. What made you decide to launch your fund before you joined forces?
I think there's a few reasons. Some negative and some positive. But I'll start with the negative ones, which is I knew I didn't want to start another game studio again, mostly because I've done it repeatedly, and at some point it's good to try something different. Um, Also, frankly, I wasn't really sure if psychologically I could handle doing another startup again. I definitely had some moments of over the years of getting very, very close to very close to breakdowns of various kinds. So to be honest with you, I really wasn't sure I had it in me, and I think unless you have an idea that is where you really feel like you have no option but to do this, then you shouldn't do it. To be frank, and then I think on a more sort of positive note, the I think it was also a feeling that I have finally gotten to a stage in my career where I've made enough mistakes. I've been through enough things, good and bad, to feel as if I could really be valuable to founders who are in that 0 to 1 phase of building their company. Um, and then I think the other thing that made me think I might be good at it, or that I might enjoy it anyway, is um, the only other thing I've done in my career aside from build game companies was I also built a community called Gaming Insiders. And it was at the time I was building social games, right? It was the early days of making games on Facebook, and I started this email list for founders just because I wanted to talk to other people who were doing similar things, and that grew over the course of a few years to this membership community of several thousand people, and we ended up hosting dinners all over the world. We had an annual conference in San Francisco that ran for several years, and I realized fairly quickly that I hated the events business, and but the piece that I really enjoyed was spending time with other founders and learning about what they were doing and finding ways to help them. And really, this is a way to do that professionally, with a real stake in their success. So yeah, I feel like it's a huge privilege, to be completely honest with you. It's a great job. So I'm having a great time.
Good. That's what you need after the brutalness of having your own game company for years.
I mean, look, we're still a startup in another way, but like any VC that says, "Oh, it's really hard," I will say it very plainly. It's very hard to be a good VC in terms of to achieve, top quartile, top decile returns is difficult. But as a sort of way to live your life, being a VC is much easier than being a startup founder. And anyone that says different is, I'll leave the rest of the sentence unsaid.
This is a safe space. It's okay.
No, it's not going to be a safe space for a lot of VCs if I start running my mouth.
Yeah. What makes your fund, would you say, different than other funds? I know you have a unique background with your partner.
What makes us different? Well, I think it is actually relatively, I wouldn't say it's unusual, because there are certainly other funds that are led by exited founders. It's certainly one of the paths. But as I look at a lot of our peers, if I look at our peers in gaming, for example, there's a lot of funds with some really smart people. Not that many of them, though, are people who've built companies, or at least not people who've built game studios. So I think that is one way that we set ourselves apart. I think the other thing that is, again, not this is not unique, but I think both Joachim and I are unusually prolific as far as writing publicly about what we think about the industry and various other things. And that's been, I think, pretty valuable for us in terms of meeting the kinds of people who are in tune with the way that we think about the world and what we look for. Um, but I don't know. I don't think we're that unusual. I mean, we're just another VC, really. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the chemistry that you have with the founders that you work with, and that's a very individual thing. That is a thing I really encourage founders to, to think very carefully about. Right, there's a lot of funds. Some have really big brands, but especially if you are very early stage, the biggest fund is not necessarily. I'm talking my book here a little bit, but I do believe this. The big fund isn't necessarily going to be the best fund for you because you will be a very small little investment for them. You might be more of an option than a focus. And so, especially if you're very early, having someone for whom you're actually meaningful, that you're a big deal, that can really make a big difference.
Maybe it's sort of like getting a job when you're first out of college, right? And if you work at a big company, that's fine. And you might want the famous name, but you might be a cog. You might not, right? Not all big companies, but you're certainly going to have more individual attention from the CEO at a startup or the founders or executives, depending on the level.
Yeah, look, different people need different things. It certainly is true even in our portfolio. We have one or two founders that, I'm talking to them very regularly. We're doing a call every week. And one of them, I'm more or less like, I'm working on their deck at the moment. Like it's very hands-on. There are other founders, we invested in Jussi Lakanen's company, Noise. Jussi is an incredibly experienced founder, absolute force of nature. Like there's what he needs from me is very different from what some of these pre-seed first-time founders need from me. And that's totally fine. That's great.
Yeah. I have a question that I think a lot of our listeners will want to know the answer to. What makes you say, yes, this company is magical, I want to invest in them?
Okay, yeah, that's a big question. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently as I reflect on who we've backed so far. And well, I'll stop rambling and give you an answer. I think the first thing to say is that 80% of the decision is the founder. And the reason, and it's sort of obvious that that's the case in some ways, because at the very, very early stage, because that is the stage at which things are most likely to change. I don't know if I have a great answer for what differentiates when you just know and when it's not clear. But I'll have a go, and I'm also very conscious that this is an area where there's a lot of subjectivity. There's a lot of potential space for bias to be, to enter into it. So we have been doing a lot of thinking about how do we actually systematize this, and we're studying this at the moment. And I'll just rather than give you a good definitive answer, I'll give you a couple of I'll call them biases, or a couple of things things that I've sort of seen. I'll start with actually something. This is I was reading the other day about a venture firm called Hummingbird, who are not incredibly well known, which is funny because they're one of the most successful investors in venture as far as gaming goes. They among other things, they were the first money into Peak Games, which I believe is probably one of the most successful investments in the history of like venture capital and gaming. It was like 1,000x return, I think. They were also the first money into Gram Games, and first money into Kraken, the crypto exchange. Just phenomenally successful firm. And I was reading an interview with one of the founders there, and he said after a long time they were looking at patterns and things, commonalities, and what he said, the conclusion that he came to was the thing that really joined all of the really successful founders was they were people who were neurodivergent with some history of trauma, and then I started thinking about some of the really successful founders that I know. And I think more or less all of them are certainly neurodivergent. I know that some of them also have a history of trauma. And I realized this is not like hey, how to get funded advice, like be neurodivergent and have a history of trauma. I'm just sort of giving you my perspective, and this is not, this is not the only way, obviously, but I think there is something to, you got to understand that, like, being a startup founder is fundamentally a really stupid thing to do. It's a highly, highly irrational decision. If you evaluate it on a rational basis, because the amount of pain, if you really do it and you really go through it. I mean, there are some startups that just, I don't know. There's probably some startup out there where it was just up and to the right and happily ever after, and nobody ever had a hard time. But
No.
you are more, okay, probably, I don't know, but you are more or less guaranteed to eat a lot of shit. You're going to have to do some really terrible things. I've had to lay off people that I loved and considered friends, that were phenomenally talented people, but we didn't have the money to pay them anymore. I had periods where, and I'm not trying to like valorize, like I'm very conscious. I'm a white man who's come from a privileged background, and like the things I've gone through do not compare to some of the things that other people from other circumstances have gone through. So like, this is not to say like, for me or anything. I'm just trying to be as transparent as I can about my own experience in that lens. I had periods where I was having panic attacks in the shower and just literally held up on the floor, couldn't move. Like, it's not an easy gig. It's not an easy gig. And so I think to do it, you have to be a little bit weird. And
yeah, for sure.
I think you also, the people that end up succeeding are the ones that survive, that just, and probably if I was going to guess where this whole sort of neurodivergent history of trauma thing comes from, is another way of thinking about it is, I know this is certainly true of me. It's definitely true of most of the founders that I know. I've kind of always had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I know a founder right now who, he's phenomenally successful. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He still has a massive chip on his shoulder. He still feels like he's got so much to prove, which is insane. Like, it's fucking insane. We have nothing to prove. But that's how he feels, and that's why he's doing it again. And so I think when I encounter, I'm writing I started writing a piece today, and the title of that piece is why I want to invest in cockroaches, not thoroughbreds. And I'll tell you what I mean. I'm still formulating my thoughts on this, but I probably shouldn't be like holding forth on a podcast about it, but maybe it'll help me think. But a thoroughbred, and I think I've been somewhat unconsciously mentally dividing people into them when I like interview them, when I talk to them. And I would say a thoroughbred is highly pedigreed. They're kind of handsome and charismatic. They are certainly capable of incredible performance under the right circumstances with the right support, but they're also kind of expensive and high maintenance. And I think that, and they tend to be actually pretty good at raising money from a lot of VCs, because they sort of look the part, they know how to tell the right story, and maybe they know the right people. And again, like, that doesn't mean that they're full of shit. Like, they can end up doing great things. But I think like so that's thoroughbreds. Cockroaches, ugly. They're not particularly well put together. They are, I think in some cases, personally, sometimes can feel a little bit objectionable. But you know what they also are? They are fucking hard to kill. And if there's one characteristic that is ultimately going to be the determinant of your success or failure, it's being unkillable. And I think to sort of bring this back to gaming, gaming companies and gaming founders, if I think about the kinds of investments that I'm most attracted to now, it's, a founder showed up the other day. He's definitely a cockroach, right? He's not amazingly personable. And by the way, this doesn't mean you should invest in people who are just like who are assholes, because like they're not going to be able to build a team. But you can be low agreeability and not an asshole. I think if you're as as a personality trait. You don't have to be highly agreeable necessarily. But the thing that was interesting about him is with basically no money, he's built a more or less fully working multiplayer game that is doing something kind of different and interesting. And it's extremely impressive, right? He's got a small team as well that I think he got an epic mega grant of like 30 grand. And I believe like someone else gave him 100 grand. But apart from that, he spent no money. And then you compare that against, I talked to a lot of teams, these are highly experienced people with great backgrounds, but they have a pitch deck and they need $6 million and 3 years to get to market. And I don't think that we as a firm or me as I don't think those are the kinds of deals that we are best placed to do. There are other firms that are and will, and good luck to them. But for me personally, I'll take the cockroach.
I have a founder friend who talks about going into cockroach mode when he starts a new company.
There's a lot of that going around at the moment, for good reason.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about how companies can not die right now?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's very context dependent, right? It helps. It depends, like where are you in the life cycle?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah, okay, maybe trying to launch, trying to get seed, trying to get Series A bit more advanced. Obviously, it's a different.
Yeah, right, exactly. Look, if you're trying to raise money now, and you haven't before, I would say first of all, I've talked in, not to like pimp my Substack, which, hey, gamestuff.substack.com. There you go. I've pimped it. There's a term I quite like, if I do say so myself, called minimum viable fidelity. So I think the first thing is, and actually a great example of a game that's blowing up right now that I would say 100% is an exemplar of like a minimum viable fidelity in action, Lethal Company, right? Absolutely blowing up. That game looks only as good as it needs to look in order to satisfy the audience that they are going after. And I think one of the things that you see quite often from people who are coming particularly out of a AAA background, especially if they've been at like a Riot or a Blizzard or name your big.
They've been at Riot. They've been at Riot Games. That's where they've been.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in many cases. Yeah. I think a lot of people have this sort of like they just bring a bunch of production expectations along with them unconsciously. Like it's almost part of their identity that they make a game that looks a certain way. And then like, it's like the market keeps telling us like again and again and again that games don't need to look that good. Like it's great when they do. And like those games obviously have a place. But I would say the first thing is be smart about picking a thing that is you are going to be able to build with a small team and as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And if you're a founder, like you're going to have better luck in this environment if you're not like the ideas guy. If you're actually capable of doing the work, if you're part of the production team. And I say this as someone who's never been part of the production team, but so I always try to make myself useful in other ways. But in terms of people I like to back, there are incredible things that can be done by a team of 1 to 5 people, and that's a real advantage in this environment.
Go cockroach and present what you have quickly.
Yes, and I'd say the other thing. So there's that. I'd say the other thing is, investors hate. Again, I wrote a piece called "How to Deal with Content Risk," right? And like content risk is a term investors use to talk about the fact that they don't know if people are going to like your game, right? And so many pitches don't really address that question. Like, how are you going to actually how can you prove that there's demand for this particular thing that you're building? And there are actually ways to do that, even ahead of actually launching the game. People always think you have to launch the game in order to sort of de-risk the go-to-market, but you don't. There's if you're creative, there's a lot of ways to do it.
How might you be able to do that? Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give an example from, I can talk from my own experience with the last game that I shipped, which was this game Phoenix Point, which we did at Snapshot, and we started out, we couldn't raise money. We talked to a few publishers. They gave us really shitty deal terms, so we told them, fuck off, basically. And then, and so we were running out of money, and we did, out of desperation. I would not recommend this, by the way, and there are other routes. I'm just going to give you the kind of what we did. So we did a crowdfunding campaign because we thought that's one way to A, make some money, and B, prove that some people at least are interested in this. But the more interesting thing, and that worked out pretty well. We raised $750,000, or give or take. We did that on a platform called Fig, which no longer exists, but it's like an equity crowdfunding platform. But I think the more interesting thing that we did was what happened afterwards, which was we were, I think we were one of the first customers for Xsolar to do it for Xsolar's web stores. I'm gonna there you go. I live next door. My next door neighbor actually works for Xsolar, so I'll go around and demand a beer from him after this for the free advertising. But we set up a store, a web page. We set up our own website, and then we set up a web store, and we started selling pre-order keys. And then what I spent the next sort of 6 months to a year doing was thinking of every possible way under the sun to drive cheap or free traffic to one or both of those destinations in order to sell pre-orders of the game. And over the course of that period of time, we did probably about $2 million worth of pre-order sales for that game. And the techniques are probably less relevant now because some of them wouldn't work anymore. So, for example, one thing that I spent a lot of time doing, people always ask me, like, what was my game of the year that year? And the answer was, it was the Facebook Ads Manager, because it was unusual for a premium game to just do Facebook ads at that point. But I kind of went and what I did was I went and got some training from someone who was like a coach on e-commerce. And I thought, actually, what we're doing here is much more like it's not really a game. It's more like an e-commerce kind of play. And so I borrowed/stole a lot of techniques for like D2C e-commerce, like how you would sell a pair of shoes or something, prospecting campaigns, retargeting campaigns. I was making our creative. I was running tests all the time. And we just got really, really good at reaching ultimately millions of people for not very much money, retargeting them mercilessly, which I suspect is much harder to do now. And then we did other things. We stole another technique from like B2B SaaS, like a lead. You know what a lead magnet is, right? Like you have like an ebook like on cybersecurity. Download, give us your email address. We'll send you an ebook on cybersecurity. So we had our writers write a series of short stories that were kind of set in the world of Phoenix Point. And if you came to our website, you got this big, obnoxious full screen pop-up that was like, give us your email address and we'll give you this free ebook series. We'll send you a new one every day for a week. And that pop-up converted in its, for a while at like 30+%, right? So we had hundreds of thousands of email addresses. And guess what? Once you were on our email list for a while, you were getting your ebooks, we also gave you a discount code for our pre-order store. And so, what that meant was we did eventually end up raising money from Tencent. But the way that when we came to talk to them, we were able to pitch like, here's our long-term vision. Here's all the pre-orders we've already done. And then here's the vertical slice that, because they wanted to see what the actual game, how the game actually played. And like that got us over the line. So I sort of have little sympathy for people who just say, oh, why is no one funding my great idea? Like, it's your responsibility to prove that people want this. And if you can't think about how to do it now, you're probably not going to be very good at thinking about it when you actually come to sell the game.
Yeah, very true. So you've had multiple startups. Can you talk a little bit about your very first startup, how you got started, came up with the idea, maybe some ups and downs from that time?
Yeah. Well, the first one, I was a kid. I mean, I was still in my final year of high school. And in my teens, I played a lot there was a text mud called Avalon. That was, so for anyone who's listening doesn't know what a mud is because you're not ancient, mud stands for multi-user dungeon or multi-user domain. The text-based MMO. and they were the predecessor. These games were the predecessors of, to Ultima Online, and eventually games like World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is design wise is a Deku mud. But anyway, that was, so I was playing a lot of this game called Avalon, which actually started by another Bay Area entrepreneur who I still am friends with, a guy called Daniel James, but who ultimately started Three Rings and made Puzzle Pirates and a bunch of other stuff. But anyway, so I was playing this game a bunch, and then in my final year of high school, I realized, oh my god, I'm going to fail all my exams if I don't quit this game. So I quit the game, and then I came back in my final year of high school, and I met a guy called Matt Mahaley, who was at the time sort of dominating this game in a very uncompromising fashion. And we were sort of chatting. We got to know each other, and we were chatting. And he's like, "I'm going to make a game," and he had like this. It was a real naive thing. He was a few years older than me. He was like 25, maybe at the time. I was 16, 17. And he's like, "I'm going to make a game. Do you want to help?" And I was like, "Sure." And originally he's like, "Great, I'll pay you $5,000," which sounded like a lot of money at the time, which it was too if you're a high school kid. Eventually, I was like, "No, I want to have some." I realized pretty quickly, like, this is a lot of work to just sort of have a fixed fee. So I ended up with a small percentage of the company, and then I sort of did it in secret. Basically, because I was in my final year of high school, and the way that it worked then in the UK was you would apply to your universities at the start of the year, and you would apply basically with predictions. Like you would say, your teachers would say what grades they thought you were going to get, and then the universities that you applied to would give you an offer. They would say, okay, well, if you get two A's and the B in your A levels, then you can. I'm probably giving you too much detail about the English educational system here, but whatever. Okay. Anyway, one of the schools I applied to was Oxford University, and the thing that was different about them was they had an exam. And if you took their exam and you passed their interview, you only needed to get 2 E's in your final exams in order to have your place at university. And because I'm the kind of person that I am, because I got that offer, I was like, well, I don't need to do any academic work anymore. So I'm going to just work on this game. And so I worked on this game all through high school, and eventually I can't remember at what point I told my parents, because my dad's a lawyer. I think it was my dad's a lawyer, and I had this contract, and I was like, I don't know any lawyers. My dad's a lawyer. So I was like, Dad, I have to tell you.
I haven't been going to school at all.
No, I was going to school. I was definitely half-assing it. But I was like, okay, so I started this company with a guy in California, and I have this contract, and I need you. It's a very
what
weird
did you
conversation.
say? What was his reaction?
He took it in stride, if I remember. He was just sort of like, okay, well, give me the contract. Give me the contract, and we'll take a look at it. So I think that was so early, and what I really learned there, really what that meant, what I learned was 2 very simple things. One is you can just do a thing. I mean, this is 1996, right? So not only this, you can do a thing and you can put it on the internet, and people will give you money sometimes. And that fundamentally shaped my worldview. And then it also taught me equity is really valuable, because that company, believe it or not, you can go to ironrealms.com. That company is still around today. I just got a dividend check last week for something I did. I'm 45 now. This was as a 16-year-old work I did as a 16-year-old kid. So I think those 2 things were burned indelibly into me and set me on the checkered path that I've taken since then.
Okay, and then walk me through the next company you founded or your career path. Would love to hear a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Oh man, okay. How long do we have? Not that long, so I'll just try and give you some highlights. The next one was actually I was a solo founder. I was living in London at the time, and I worked after college. I went to work for a company called Lycos that was basically it was a portal search engine pre-Google, and I was on their mobile team. And anyway, I wasn't a good fit I got fired like I have been from every job I've ever been, or laid off technically, I guess. I was fired from there. So okay, I guess I'll try and start. And I had an idea, and to be fair, it was actually a really good idea. And the idea was, this was in the age of mobile phones. This is obviously way pre-smartphones, right? So this is we're talking about early 2000s here. And so everyone had Nokia phones, right? And you could Nokia phones had apps, right? They were good, but they were Java apps, J2ME, right? And I thought, the idea that I had, the company was called Mobilista, and I've never told anyone about this company. And the company was called Mobilista, and the proposition was, so at the time, like the mobile content business was like very heavily oriented around ringtones and wallpapers, mostly ringtones, as well as like as well. I'm fucking old, okay? I'm fucking old. So was ringtones and wallpapers, and to a lesser extent games, like really crappy games, because you had these like mobile phone keyboards. And the problem that I saw was you could buy, and like the way that you bought ringtones was like you would see an ad in like a paper, and like it would say, oh, like Beverly Hills Cop theme or whatever, and you like text this number to another number, right? And like it would text it to you, and like that was how it worked, right? And I thought, well, it would be really good if you could like listen to these ringtones before before you buy them, right? And I thought, well, okay, the way you could do that is if you had an app that sat on your phone, and what that app was like a gateway to other kinds of apps and other kinds of content. Um, and and so like the way it works, we built this thing where you would like go to a web page, type in your phone number, it would text you a link, you would hit that link, you would download an app, and the other thing that the advantage of having an app is you had a much better user experience, because at the time mobile internet was on a thing called WAP, like wireless access protocol, which was this incredibly like slow loading, web pages, basically like very text heavy web pages. And if you had an app, you could download the app, and once you downloaded it, you could like patch all of the content and give people like a really snappy user experience. And you could do things like preview ringtones and stuff before you bought them. And it was a really cool product, actually, but it failed, and I'll tell you why. For two reasons. One is I did not know this term at the time, but our unit economics that related to the way we went to market, which was we partnered. So I just left Lycos, right? And we decided it was quite a thing at the time to do like a white label service, and so we didn't go to market directly, which we should have. We went to market in partnership with these various other internet companies that would promote the service, and we'd kind of brand it for them. And the problem with that was they sucked at marketing, and so we were highly dependent on them for traffic. And the other thing was it really messed with our unit economics, particularly if you were selling a ringtone. You were splitting revenue with the record label, the partner, and then you had a tiny bit from left afterwards. So that was the first lesson. The other one, this is going to be not a very politically correct one, but we had a search function in the app, right? And we would log what are people searching for. And Lizzie, I'm going to ask you to guess what people were searching for.
Yes, I got it. Yeah.
Okay, so they were searching for adult content. Let's not put too fine a point on it, right? And it would have been very easy to do a thing where it's like, hey, pay £2, and for 24 hours we'll give you access to this library of content, right? And I agonized over this for a long time. Oh my God, what about my reputation? Well, I have just like, no one knows who you are.
What are you gonna tell your family in the holiday?
No one, it's like no one knows who you are. Like, and it's like, had we done that, it would have made had we done that, and had we gone to market directly, we'd have made a fortune. Do I regret it? Maybe. I think if I'd made that much money that early, I might have turned into a complete arsehole. So it's probably a good thing. Maybe I didn't become a mobile porn king at the age of like 23. But
that's probably yeah.
But it would have worked. I'm pretty sure it would have worked.
Yeah.
But anyway, the business lesson was unit economics and listen to your customer. Do customer development.
And then I want to talk a little bit about the company that you sold to, Embracer. Can you share about what led you to start that? And I'm very interested to hear what you're allowed to say about what you learned throughout the sales process, because that's not something that's always talked about. What do you wish you knew? What were your lessons? What would you tell someone who's selling their company?
Yeah, well, that I can sort of talk about. There are some other things I can't, but I just won't talk about things I can't talk about. So your first question was just why did I start that company, and
what led you to it? How did you
that was like it was sort of a labor of love in some ways, in that I was a huge fan of, so as a kid, I loved there were so my co-founder was a guy called Julian Gollop. He's best known for he's a designer. He's been designing games since the 80s. Best known for making the game XCOM, and I had always been a huge fan of his work. And as I kind of went through my career, and I was observing him from afar, and sort of thought, oh, this guy has not had the commercial success that I think is commensurate with the talent that he has. And so I just heard something somewhere about him leaving Ubisoft, where he'd been for several years, and he was going to go and start a new company. And I reached out to Megan, who used to run GDC, now runs Dice, and she was like the one person who seemed to be our mutual connection, because he was not easy to find. He was like living in Bulgaria. She connected us, and then we spent GDC together, and decided to start this company together. And it was really driven by that. It was just driven by I thought he was a very special talent, and that was how we started working together.
Did you have the idea? Did he have the idea? Did you come up with it together?
For the company or for the game?
Both.
Well, I mean, the company was pretty straightforward. It was like he's like, I'm going to start making games again, and I was like, well, you should probably have me to help you. So I was like, I reached out to him. Like, I guess it was me that was the instigator in that sense. Yeah.
But how did you come up with the idea for your game after that? So you're at GDC, you agree you're going to start a company.
Yeah. So the first game, the Phoenix Point was our second game. The first game was a game called Chaos Reborn, and it was Julian. The division of responsibility in the company was Julian was responsible for design and product, and I was responsible for the business side of things. Both of the games though were really us revisiting designs that he had previously of games he previously made. So our first game was called Chaos Reborn. It was essentially a remake of a game called Chaos, and then the second game, Phoenix Point, was really a spiritual successor to XCOM. And so in the case of Phoenix Point, for example, Julian said, I said to Julian, I can't remember if I said to Julian or Julian, I think we both said to each other, like, because also the studio had gotten to a point where we actually could do a game of that scale, or at least we had the beginnings of a team that could do a game of that scale, whereas we couldn't at the beginning. And I can't remember who said to who, like, hey, maybe we should have another go at this whole XCOM thing. And then also, originally, we had a plan that was a little bit more ambitious, that was, what if this was not just a single play game, but what if we called it a sort of shared world strategy game? So it's like what Destiny was to shooters, what if Phoenix Point was to this kind of game? It's like a shared world strategy game. We never actually got as far as making it, but it definitely was part of what we pitched in the beginning.
And then at what point did you decide to sell, or did the sale walk through the door? And how did you decide the time was right?
Companies are bought, not sold. So we were approached by the folks at Saber Interactive, and I believe, and I think that sort of came about because we were one of the first Epic Game Store exclusives, so we had a good relationship with Epic, and I think Saber at one point had turned to Epic and said, we want to buy some companies. Who should we look at? And that was, I think, how the conversation started. I think it was pretty clear to us, like, being an independent game developer is hard. We had some real near-death moments. There was a point going into the Phoenix Point crowdfunding campaign where I basically had to take out a big loan against all of my investment, basically my retirement savings, so that we could make payroll. And if that crowdfunding campaign had not succeeded, that would have been very bad for me. That would have been very bad for me personally.
Fully invested and go in cockroach mode.
Yeah, and it's like, I remember, I remember my parents had said to me when I started this other company, they're like, just promise me you won't endanger your put your life savings into this company or something. And I was like, okay. And then I proceeded to basically do something like that. Yeah, it worked out, thankfully. I mean, I believed that I saw what the team had put together for the campaign and stuff, so I was pretty confident. But it was definitely a nervous couple of weeks.
Yeah, I bet. Did you stay on after the integration for X time or no?
I did for a couple of years. For a couple of years, I think it was sort of increasingly clear that the work, my work there was kind of coming to a close, really.
Yeah.
So it was time.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. There are some stats, maybe you know them, on how long a founder can stay after acquisition, but it's generally not all that long.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it all depends, right? It depends on what the job looks like afterwards and what the opportunity is and things like this. But I think for us, it was it was a really good outcome for but we were ultimately a pretty small studio in a very large organization, right? So I just sort of found myself doing things that the things that didn't
Align.
you sort of know when you're doing what you love doing and when you're doing something that you just sort of need to do. And so no one was getting a ton of value out of it at that stage, probably.
Will you share your biggest career obstacle? Would love a story about, you alluded to tough times taking out loans against your house, but there's so many ups and downs. And I always want to highlight on the podcast that the lows are low and that success comes at a price, because it does.
Yeah, it really does.
Maybe obstacles are lessons that you've learned.
I will say that I think the times where I've been unhappiest have been when I was doing things for the wrong reasons. By which I mean, there were times when I was doing things because I want to say maybe it's ego that I'm talking about. I'm transitioned into online therapy here, but where the hardest moments have been, because it's really like startups really really hard, right? For all we've talked about all the terrible things that can happen. And we're doing right now with this fund, raising money. We're raising money in a venture in an environment that is, arguably the worst time to raise money in the history, in the last 15 years, right? But I'm having a great time. And the reason is I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, like what I'm meant to do. It aligns with how I want to spend my time. And the worst moments where I really can, and that's why I will just keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, and you will just not stop me. But there were times in my career where I found myself doing something because I felt like it was the thing that I was supposed to be doing, but it was not the thing that I actually wanted to be doing or loved doing or was energized by doing. And that's where burnout comes from. And all of these things that we're talking about are manifestations of burnout fundamentally. And that, I think if there's one lesson, that one thing that unifies all of the worst times, it was that.
How did you figure out what it is that you really wanted to do, though? Because that's such a hard thing to figure out.
It is. I think part of it is just like you get older and you know yourself better. So to be honest with you, you sort of just gain more self-knowledge. Therapy probably helped. I also had some friends, like this thing that I'm doing. I needed a bit of a nudge actually to start this fund, and I had several entrepreneur friends who were like, "You should do this," and they were like, "You should do this." And by the way, if you do this, I will write a check. So
that helps.
That helps, right? So that talking to people there. If you're lucky, there'll be a handful of people that you'll encounter in your work life where the relationship will go deeper than work, and they will understand the context of they'll have the context of the industry and all of that stuff, but they will also know you quite deeply, and keep those people close because they will have great advice. Most advice is not worth listening to, but people who know you really well and have real experience of milieu in which you operate, they're going to listen to those people.
Yeah, in which you operate, but I learned lots of things from people that have, like my friend has a landscaping business. We have the same problems. I mean, we have a lot of problems, right? Like we're maybe curled up on the floor in our own separate houses, but at least we could talk about it and have an understanding
100%.
what we're going through. So
100%. No, I don't mean they have to know your industry backwards, but I think there has to be some commonality of experience of some kind.
I mean, industry is even better, but it's rare. Yeah, I think about that a lot. All the people that help me all the time, because everyone needs help. And you don't know where you will find them. I know you're really into live video with viewer gameplay. Can you talk about why you love this and this theme a bit?
Okay, so I mean, that's maybe overstating it a little bit. I've certainly been very interested in it, and we certainly have made investments recently in it. I think as a venture capitalist, you're looking for the new thing, but you're also looking for, like, if you think about the history of the games industry, where growth has come from. Generally speaking, this is how the industry has grown. Something happens to reduce friction of one sort or another, and that expands the market. Mobile is a good example of this, right? What did that do? It put a gaming device in everyone's pocket. And that, combined with the business model of free to play, which also reduced the friction of having to invest money in a game before you play it, led to a massive expansion of the market. And another form of friction reduction, if you like, is new distribution, right? When there's new distribution opportunities, then and new platforms, I guess, also, then that's where opportunity tends to come from. And often it's opportunity that incumbents are not really well placed to address. Like the advantages that they have, being really big on, mobile, or being really big on console or whatever, those advantages don't really carry over because the content is different, the form factor is different, the distribution is different, right? And like that's where investors, early stage investors, should be, because like in some cases those platforms and those opportunities are dead ends, right? Like TikTok might be that. It could easily be. I mean, I realize there's other things too. And I think so as far as like live video and the intersection of live video and games, I think I'm actually, this is another thing that's on my list of things to write about. I haven't really formulated my thoughts, but I have this sort of innate gut sense that there is opportunity at the intersection of live performance and gameplay that's not been fully mined and explored. I think the final form of live video and games is Twitch. I just don't. So I'm following my nose, for want of a better term, but I think it's, as I say, I think it's the most new platformy opportunity I see at the moment.
Yeah, shiny and maybe magical. Is it magical?
I mean, Noise is magical. If you get Yossi to give you a demo, it's pretty magical. What he's building over there, I think.
Can you share a little bit more for anyone that's not familiar?
Sure. Yeah, I think I can. It's in closed. I mean, we're on a podcast and I don't have the time to check, so I don't want to get in trouble with. I don't get in trouble with Yossi in case it's not sort of public yet. But okay. It's a really cool demo, and it'll be live to everybody, I'm sure, quite soon.
Good. Can you share a little bit of advice for people who are trying to get funding? And I think it's obviously important to stay true to yourself, but so many people want to also stay on trend and weave certain current trends into their pitch. What advice do you have for founders? I guess founders just putting their pitch together, and I'm sure advice, right? Like add AI to your pitch, add this to your pitch.
Yeah, this is going to be really hard to squeeze into like 2 minutes, to be honest with you. First of all, I should say this. There are lots of sources of funding for games and game companies. And actually, venture capital is not a good fit for most. If you're talking about a game, if you're like an indie developer listening to this, you probably are wasting your time pitching to a VC, right? And the reason for that is our business model is we have 10 years to return, ideally 3 times the capital or more that we were given by the people who invested in our fund. And so what that means is we require extremely rapid growth, right? And extremely rapid growth is in some ways antithetical to, especially if you're talking about sort of PC games, that are more core, is often antithetical to how you build a really great game company, to be completely frank with you. So there was there was an intersection in the past decade between venture and gaming because of mobile, because it was the perfect manifestation of games for venture capital, because you could build a product for relatively little money, and then if it worked, you could pour vast amounts of money into it to scale really, really quickly. And that was because it was a blue ocean and because UA was not broken. And now the market is mature, and the UA situation is pretty bad, pretty dire from most accounts, anyway. And so what's happened is, as a consequence, you've seen VCs go into funding other things, funding these big PC games and so forth. But I mean, I think if you step back and you look at think about the games that everyone absolutely loves and that have become enormously successful with this past year. You think about games like Baldur's Gate 3, you think about Hades, you think about Elden Ring. The thing that all those games have in common is that they were all made by studios that had been iterating for a very long time on the same set of ideas across multiple titles. For Baldur's Gate 3, there was Divinity Original Sin, there was Divinity Original Sin 2, and, by the way, a very long period of early access. Elden Ring, obviously, you had Dark Souls, Demon Souls. I don't need to rehearse the whole thing, but it's true of all of those things. And so, what I would say is, I don't know why, maybe you can answer this question for me. I think publishers have a role to play here. And I've been sort of, another piece that's in my drafts folder it has the title "Rise of the Neo Publishers," and what I'm seeing is actually there's a kind of a resurgence of publishers who are all sort of doing interesting and slightly different things, and who in some ways are probably a better fit for you if your goal is to make a game on an existing platform and go to market in a relatively normal way. That's probably not a venture thing. And there are still there are exceptions, right? But that probably isn't, because your outcome is going to be in a certain range, and you're not going to necessarily grow fast enough, and actually venture could really hurt you. But there are what Kepler is doing is very, very interesting. Annapurna is doing phenomenally well with the kind of for the specific kind of game that they make. Blumhouse just got into publishing. There are other forms of money that require different things that don't have the stringent growth or costs requirement that the venture business model demands. So I would say, first of all, the right thing might be really ask yourself, should I be taking venture? That would be the first thing. There's a lot of other ways to get money these days.
That's good advice. Yeah, I can see how people would think that might be the only option. It's funny to have investors on and have you talk about why people should not take your money.
No, because you should only venture should be for weird stuff. It should be for weird stuff because that has an asymmetric return profile.
Right. I mean,
it shouldn't be for a good game.
Yeah, which it was for so long. So COVID were interesting times, but times are changing.
Look, it's going to go back. I've been knocking around long enough to remember the days when I first tried to raise venture capital for a game company in 2006, and there were, you could count on one hand the number of firms that did it.
Yeah.
I mean, look, one of the most famous investors or in games of all time, Mitch Lasky, has made fewer than a dozen game investments in his entire career. At least his career as a VC. He may have done some other stuff as an angel. What does that tell you?
That you're investing in things that aren't necessarily games. That's what that's telling me. I have one last question before I ask it. I want to point people to your website, f4.fund, and your Substack, which is pimp it out.
Gamestuff.substack.com.
Thank you so much. The last question, where do you see the future of the industry in the next couple of years? 2024, 2025, what are your big predictions?
Oh God. Well, there's going to be a lot more games, and because it's going to get easier and easier to make games, and I know this because I see, AI is going to have a role in this. I don't know if that's a net positive, honestly. I don't think we need more games. I think we need fewer, better games. But I think we're going to see a lot more, even more. That's an uncontroversial prediction because you look at everyone's seen that chart of Steam releases. Oh man, I don't know. I should have come into this with predictions. I'm not a predictions guy. I feel like I'm better at looking back and looking at what's going on right now, which is bad. I'm just like, I guess my job is to figure out what the future looks like. But shit.
You can talk about right now. You can talk about the past. The past is always an indication. COVID boom was really interesting. Like, why are we here right now? Why are there so many layoffs? That's an interesting topic. And what does that mean for the future? And maybe that's not an answer question.
Yeah. Too much money. Too much money went in. Too much money, and the problem is that people do not have an infinite amount of time, and the US population is not growing fast enough, and so we are going to hit some, we're hitting some ceilings somewhere. So that's part of it. I'm still very bullish because games are the sort of prime mover in culture now in the way that they really weren't before. And I think that is going to, I think that actually, if I'm looking at the future, I'm very, very bullish on, not so much on user-generated content per se. Again, I wrote a thing about that fairly recently, but on the next big thing, the next MCU I don't think that will necessarily be developed in a wholly top-down way. I think it will not be like a kind of an elite coterie of writers sort of mapping out the entire future of the universe from some Hollywood backlot somewhere. I think that if you look at the success of Five Nights at Freddy's, pardon me, just became the highest grossing movie that Blumhouse has ever released. This is the studio that made Us, that made Get Out, and I think one reason for that is, and I can't prove this to be fair, but the unusual thing about that game, about that whole IP, is they embraced they called it the fanverse, this massive universe of user-generated fan games, stories, videos, you name it. And I think if there's one thing I think we're going to see more and more of in the future, it is creators working hand in hand with existing communities. Another way I sort of like to frame this is like, we've always told, that go back into history, it's like for thousands of years, we've all gathered around the campfire to sort of tell stories, right? And today, the campfire is the internet, and it spreads all kinds of stories, and some of those are quite malign stories, like conspiracy theories and stuff. But then others are these really interesting, collaborative fiction communities on places like Reddit, and like it's become the medium through which we tell these stories. And you think about like the advantages from a kind of user acquisition, I suppose, if you want to get into that, from that perspective. But if you've got all these different on-ramps into your universe, instead of just hoping that they see your billboard or your internet ad or whatever, that's a very robust position to be in as a creator. So I think that's something we'll see more and more of.
Yeah.
There we go. I got your prediction.
Nailed it. We've been talking to David Kaye, who's general partner of the F4 Fund. David, where can people go to follow you? Are you on X? Obviously, shout out to your Substack. People maybe want to pitch you with their game.
We have a pitch form at f4.fund/pitch. Get an intro if you can, but we do look at everything, and we respond to every single pitch that we receive. Warm intro is better. It shows that you're kind of resourceful enough, but equally, some people just don't have the network, so totally fine to pitch. We've invested off of cold pitches. I'm at David Kaye on most platforms. I'm not really active on X anymore because I don't really want to be on an anti-Semitic hellscape of a website. But maybe on Threads more. I'm at David Kaye, DAVIDKAYE, pretty much everywhere.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.